Just trouble till the robins come.
Blue Velvet released at what was probably the darkest point in David Lynch's career, as his adaptation of Dune was a complete flop, and wound up so, he would say bad, and he doesn't even claim it to be his movie. It was one of those instances where the studio just wouldn't leave someone to their vision, which is always irritating, but it's an even stranger assertion to make when you hired the guy who made Eraserhead and The Elephant Man. Trying to have some outside source direct that kind of unbridled creativity is never going to work well, and Dune is one of the best examples of how damaging studio intervention can be. But maybe in some ways the failure of Dune was actually a blessing, both for Lynch's career and also the world of film in general, since it was the lack of control that he had over Dune that ultimately led him to wanting to make Blue Velvet, which is as true to his vision as you could possibly ask for. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Dino De Laurentiis, who helped Lynch get the budget down to $4 million, agreed to not meddle with anything, and even formed an entire company to distribute the movie because he didn't think that anyone else would do it. Amazing. Blue Velvet marked the start of Lynch only wanting to work on projects in which he had final cut, and it shows. It's a dark, strange, upsetting, funny, and extremely thoughtfully crafted film that was a beautiful redemption for him after the train wreck of Dune, so let's crawl into the ear in the dirt and talk about this movie, because, well, I can't confidently say what my favorite David Lynch movie is. This is the one I find myself revisiting the most often. I just can't stop watching it. Blue Velvet is very much so a movie exploring the contrast between the bright and sunny world of sunshine and beautiful blue skies, picket fences and colorful flowers, and the dark underbelly that's never all that far away, full of grungy industrialism and terrifying maniacs ripping their way through the world. This is something that's present in a lot of Lynch's work, but it's in Blue Velvet where it probably feels like that's the focus more so than anything else. We're introduced to the world of this film through imagery that feels oddly nostalgic, even as someone who didn't grow up during the same era or in the same region in which Lynch is pulling this from. The opening scene essentially serves to set up that duality that will be embodied by Kyle MacLachlan's character later on, with that warm and inviting world being disrupted by Jeffrey's father having a stroke in the yard while watering the lawn. I like how they help show us what happened here by giving a close-up on the hose bursting to represent like the blood vessel doing the same, and once he falls, we drop down into the grass where he now lays and fall into the darkness as bugs and dirt and shadow take over the scene. You couldn't really ask for a more fitting introduction to this story. The film follows Jeffrey, the son of the man whom we watched have a stroke in that opening scene, as he goes down the rabbit hole of a dark criminal underworld after discovering a human ear in a field. Having the thing that draws Jeffrey into this other world be an ear is such a good decision, since it's not only a body part with a hole in it that helps to reflect him entering into something else, but it's also one that sits right next to the brain and could be seen as an entrance directly into the mind, where all of Jeffrey's dark curiosities lie and will soon be tended to. Jeffrey is played by Lynch regular and extremely good friend Kyle MacLachlan. These two had such a beautiful and unique friendship and were basically made to work with each other, and they go on to do Twin Peaks a while later. I could sit here and do an entire video just talking about how perfect they are, but I'd recommend going and just watching the one of many compilations on YouTube of these two together. It's rare to see this perfect of a director-actor relationship. The thing that I think makes this movie work so well is that on its face, it's a rather simple story. Guy who's grown up in the white picket fence suburbs is curious about the darker side of the world he was never exposed to, falls in deeper than he was looking to, realizes it's actually not fun to be in, and then does what he can to help the people he met and save the day. That narrative in and of itself could be done in a fairly uninteresting way, but this is a David Lynch movie, which means that it's anything but. One of my favorite things about Blue Velvet is how the film uses visual motifs to illustrate Jeffrey's curiosity growing and how his relationship to this darkness alters throughout the course of the film. One motif comes in the shape of these images of a burning candle in a dark room, which begins as a flicker when his curiosity is something that's just drawing him to want to see this world, and as he becomes seduced by the dark allure of it all, it slowly grows to the point where he begins acting in a way that causes him to feel ashamed of himself, unable to recognize his own behavior when he does things like hitting Dorothy, which results in a massive explosion of that steadily growing flame we've seen, only for it to be seen fading away the morning after as he comes face to face with Frank, a man who he found himself crying over after seeing him for the first time because of the deplorable things Jeffrey saw him doing, only to find himself engaging in some of the same behavior. That thought terrifies him and completely turns him away from wanting to be a part of this whole thing, especially after he felt Frank was looking straight into his soul and made sure he wouldn't think anything else.
You're like me.
That recurring flame is a really nice reflection of Jeffrey's relationship with the darker side of the world, but there are so many ways that they go about lighting certain scenes to get across more of what's going on. The scene of him speaking with his parents before his first trip out to Dorothy's apartment is lit in a way that makes him look villainous, but what I really love about it is how much it emphasizes his shadow on the wall behind him. Like, it's showing how he hasn't fallen into that side of himself yet, but that darkness is already there, nonetheless, existing within his fascination, lurking just behind as it waits for its chance to step into his body. I also love Sandy's introduction in the film, with her emerging from the night outside of her house, which both shows how she's yet another key he needs in finding his way into this world, as she has information that will allow him to pursue his curiosity, but it's also a great representation of how he's romanticizing that seedier side of the world, as she's got, bright, lovely blonde hair and pink dress. The allure is strong. Then we have moments like the flickering elevator lights as he enters Dorothy's apartment for the first time, showing the broken down side of the world she exists in, and also showing how Jeffrey's light is flickering between two states, and he'll soon find himself in a place where it would feel quite fitting to use one of the movie's recurring lines.
Now it's dark.
I also love how this building is called Deep River Apartments, which makes it feel like it's something that's far out into a place where no one should be. They linger on the shot of him entering the building just long enough for the door to shut behind him, indicating how he's being trapped in this world without him even knowing it yet. The movie is filled to the brim with that kind of thing, like the detail on the morning after seeing Frank in Dorothy's apartment, where we can see these jaws mounted on the wall behind him as he grows uncomfortable at the thought of the things he's been indulging in, like he's seeing himself as a monster in this moment. I have no doubt that there are many more small details like this that I'll pick up on as I inevitably continue to rewatch this insane movie, but I think you get the point. They do a phenomenal job of representing his descent into this world. I think one of the most important things about this movie is that Jeffrey is not an irredeemable character. He's just someone who grew up completely sheltered from the dark side of humanity and developed a fascination with it, since it feels, from the outside, like a seductive world filled with darkness and lawlessness. But what matters is that the deeper he goes, the more he realizes that the fantasy that he had built up in his head is not worth the baggage that comes along with the reality of it. How that depiction of this world being a fantasy is something that's shown through the choice of music that Frank throws on at Ben's place. In Dreams by Ray Orbison is what he picks, and he cuts off the tape right before it gets to the part of the song where the dawn comes and Ray wakes up from the dream that he had been singing about. Frank himself sees this world as a sort of fantasy and doesn't want to acknowledge the part where that ends, even if he does later on in the movie, but he's a little preoccupied and not as focused on the music at that point. There's this innocence to Jeffrey that makes him quite a compelling character, and once he reaches his breaking point, the sadness that can be felt through him is something that goes a very long way in preventing him from feeling like a piece of shit. That being said, he did, sneak into a woman's apartment, steal her key, hide in her closet, and watch her undress, so okay, yeah, no, he's definitely not perfect. That's super fucked up. But I also think it's extremely important for the context of the film. One of my favorite things about this movie is how well it invests us in Jeffrey's journey. When he finds that ear, it's such a compelling setup for a mystery that we're itching for him to go and hide in that closet and try and get deeper into this mystery. But then Lynch pulls one of the most effective "this is what you wanted, isn't it?" moments that I think I've ever seen. I do have to be somewhat careful about how I word talking about this scene because of YouTube's guidelines, but while Jeffrey watches from the closet, Frank forces himself on Dorothy in such an over-the-top, disturbing, batshit insane sequence that always makes me so deeply uncomfortable. But that's what's key to this movie. Blue Velvet essentially acts as a means for us to be a voyeur into a world that I think many people are fascinated by from an outside perspective. And like Jeffrey, we get so wrapped up in wanting to know more and almost seduced by the dreamy world that's built up that we may as well be there in that closet with him, itching to know what we may see. So when the movie has this scene play out in such a deeply uncomfortable, disturbing way, it's a sort of slap in the face to us for taking part in all of this. Our curiosity may be powerful, but here we're being shown that we really don't want anything to do with any of this. Having scenes of this subject matter is something that is very tricky because it's one of those things that you need to have a really good justification for including. I've seen too many movies that have things like this that are just gratuitous and unneeded and add absolutely nothing to the story. Looking at you, Rob Zombie's unrated cut of Halloween. Over-the-top gore, stuff like that can be fun, but this kind of thing is never fun and shouldn't be. And while Blue Velvet honestly has one of the most uncomfortable examples of this sort of thing that I've seen, it's one of the few that feels like it really, truly does earn including something like this, because it's entirely meant to be a sort of mirror shining the audience's own interest back at them. We're meant to be disgusted and horrified, and not for any vain purpose, but instead it's a core part of the entire point of the movie. Jeffrey is, as he should be, very shaken by what he saw happen, but it doesn't keep him away. Instead, it recontextualizes for him why he wants to get involved in this, and it turns to him wanting to help Dorothy out of her predicament, which he's doing for two reasons. I do genuinely believe that Jeffrey cared about Dorothy, felt bad for what he saw happen to her, was upset, and hates Frank for doing it to her. He does want to help, but again, it's that yearning for a life that has more mystery, curiosity, and excitement in it than the one he knew. So now, being faced with something that the cops don't know about, that he has some of the answers to, he takes on this sort of detective role and finds a new angle to indulge in. Like he's finding a way to justify it. At the same time, he's becoming involved with Dorothy sexually, which I do think is, it's not like he ever forces himself on her like Frank does or anything like that, but I do think that Dorothy is in such a vulnerable, abused, and exploited position that it makes you look at Jeffrey through a pretty rough lens, where, I mean, you could easily argue whether or not he's really thinking about this, he is taking advantage of her as a way to indulge in that side of himself. The thing is that throughout the film, Jeffrey is trying to be a part of this darker side of the world, but only for the exciting parts of it. The mystery, the curiosity, the dark sexuality that he finds there. But what's important is that at any point prior to his run-in with Frank, he can just walk away whenever he wants to. If he changed his mind and lost interest, then he gets to go back to the white picket fence life that he was in before, but the same can't be said for someone like Dorothy. She's completely trapped here, not only because it's just a part of where she lives in a much seedier part of town, but because her husband and son are literally being held captive and their lives are being threatened so that Frank can do with Dorothy as he wishes, going so far as to say that if she decides to tap out, then the other two are going with her. It's an extremely disturbing and sad spot that she's in, and Jeffrey's basically trying to dip his toes into the water without fully understanding the depths that lay just a step further. And there's a current in these waters that is going to pull him in the longer he stands there for. You can't be half in and half out. That's of course not to say that the dark and light don't coexist. They do, and they should. That's kind of the whole point of the movie, reflected in a really cool detail during the ending where Jeffrey is wearing a white shirt with black spots on it, whereas through most of the movie he's dressed in dark clothes. He saw that other side, he experienced some pretty horrifying stuff, and while he's able to climb back out, find some good, and genuinely save Dorothy and her son from the nightmare they were in, that darkness will always be there. It doesn't need to share equal space with the light, but it has to be there in order for the light to truly shine. Just like how it's not as if these crawling bugs and dirt we saw in the opening scene are suddenly gone at the end. They're still there, we're just not falling into them. I want to touch on Sandy a bit more because she's a really great character. Something that I love about Blue Velvet is how so many of the characters are sort of representative of various stages of indulgence with our darker nature, with Frank being fully on the dark side of the spectrum, and Dorothy's son likely being the purest representation of someone in the light, despite his innocence certainly being compromised by what's happened. But then there's all this space in the middle, and while Sandy isn't willing to go as far into it as Jeffrey is, she still has that same fascination. I really enjoy how Lynch went about handling this side of Sandy's character, because quite often as Jeffrey is talking about what he plans to do in order to gain more information, Sandy is saying that she thinks he should stop and that it's not safe to continue. She's always willing to hear him out on it, and does indeed help him in his pursuit, because she is also curious about this other side. With her father being a police officer, she's grown up hearing the whispered and muffled pieces of criminal investigations through the walls and ceilings, since her bedroom is right above his office in their home, and over time, that feeling of getting snippets of these stories has probably driven her a little mad, wanting to see the complete picture of something. So when Jeffrey shows up and is wanting to do the same, she is hooked from the moment she meets him. She's in a relationship with someone at her school, but speaks about this like she's trying to convince herself that she's perfectly happy where she's at, saying the words out loud so that she can hear them in the hopes that they will solidify it for her. She's uncomfortable with this stuff, but simply can't stay away. If she truly didn't want Jeffrey to continue and was completely against helping him break into Dorothy's home, she wouldn't have heard him out at all in the diner.
Well, you can tell me any plan you want, but it's not going any further than this diner.
She's got a nice life and a good home with a family that clearly makes decent money, and they seem to be, good parents. And she's sort of living the high school dream, but when Jeffrey showed up in his dark clothes asking her to be part of the mystery, she couldn't possibly not follow that road. Again though, she's not as far into this as Jeffrey is. She seems to be mostly interested in this stuff as a sort of subconscious way to emphasize the good stuff that she does have, like exposing her to the other side will make her appreciate the life that she has even more, while also satiating that morbid curiosity. I love how the movie handles this side of the story with moments like her getting visibly upset when she sees how Jeffrey's watching Dorothy's performance at the lounge. It's a reflection of how the things that she says often aren't accurate to how she truly feels, with her talking about loving her boyfriend as a way to make it clear that she's not interested in Jeffrey, and while it becomes undeniably clear by the end of the film that that was never true, it's cool to get this moment early on where we can see her jealousy growing as she watches him be allured by another woman, especially because Sandy knows that she can't really fulfill the thing that's drawing Jeffrey towards Dorothy. He represents something for her that's exciting and interesting, and by the end of the film, they do have a genuinely strong bond, but that's not the case throughout. Sandy also brings about one of the best scenes of the whole movie, where following his sighting of Frank attacking Dorothy, Jeffrey has a breakdown in her car and is very upset after being exposed to the nastiness in the world, and Sandy comes out with this beautiful monologue about a dream that she'd had.
Thousands of robins were set free.
Laura Dern was only 18 when she landed this role and dropped out of UCLA only 2 days into her semester in order to work on it. Starting your career off with something like Blue Velvet, despite me considering it a brilliant film, is a huge risk. Thankfully, it paid off more than enough here, and when you get to this scene, it's really not hard to see why that is. It's that very recognizable approach to dream writing that's a staple of Lynch's work, and she handles it so well. The dynamic between these two throughout the film is just so charming, and I always get frustrated with Jeffrey after a while because it's so clear that they have a really good thing going and he should be backing out to just be with her. But admittedly, his intentions do become more noble after his wake-up call, so it is more complicated than that. Sandy's just a really interesting and well-written character, and it's cool to see that Laura Dern was able to start her career off with such a unique film. Dorothy Valens is played by Isabella Rossellini, who faced a lot of problems because of this film due to its rough nature. She was dropped from her agency during test screenings upon the film's release, faced a lot of social scrutiny for her involvement, which is a real shame, not only because she did an absolutely brilliant job in the movie with what's arguably the toughest role, but also because I feel like in order to have something against her for playing this part, you need to completely miss the entire point of the character. Dorothy is often in scenes that are very sexual, but the whole point of this isn't to have some steamy romance scenes. It's meant to show how trapped she is. It's upsetting. Dorothy's scenes are very darkly erotic when she's with Jeffrey, but they're portrayed that way because we're essentially seeing the movie through his eyes, and he doesn't have the full context here. Frank has kidnapped Dorothy's son and husband, mutilated her husband, and threatens both of them with further harm if Dorothy doesn't do what Frank wants her to do. When she's with Jeffrey, she opens herself up to further abuse, asking him to treat her the way that she's used to being treated. And because of his naivety, he's seduced by this and falls into it himself. Yes, there's a lot of, rather explicit sexual material in this movie, but it's all just deeply sad. It's not meant to be erotic, so it's a shame to see that this is how it played out for her. That brings us to Frank, played by Dennis Hopper, who at the time of taking the role was in quite a lull in his career and was also recently sober. He took this one very seriously and would often get frustrated with others on set if they weren't focused on task and seemed to be really wanting to regain some favor as an actor. David Lynch bringing him on turned out to be a wonderful decision because he gives one of the most unhinged and disturbing performances you'll ever find. Frank is essentially here is the absolute far end of the spectrum of darkness. He's a vulgar, horrible person with zero redeeming qualities. But what I think makes him such a fascinating character is that while he could have simply been nothing more than the embodiment of the grossest parts of humanity, Lynch was able to add a level of dimension to him that, while rather quiet, brings some very interesting material to the table. There are these fleeting moments where you can see something more human coming from Frank, another side that isn't just the awful bottom-of-the-barrel scumbag that he shows himself to be in most moments, like when he gets lost in Ben's performance of In Dreams, seemingly entranced by it. I'm going to talk about how terrible he is, but I want to take a second to speculate on a few things that I find make him so interesting. It may be a stretch, but I actually see Frank as a sort of alternate life path to Dorothy's son, who was exposed to this side of things at a very young age, but while he's ultimately freed from that by the end and is able to return to a more peaceful life, Frank did not manage the same thing. There are hints here that Frank was probably abused as a child by his parents. Taking into account some of the things he says while attacking Dorothy in her apartment, it's very clear that he has some distortions when it comes to the relationships between parents and children.
Baby wants to fuck.
My read on this is that his mother probably wore some sort of a blue velvet dress, and while I'm not exactly sure how I can word this, I wonder if his father may have, forced him to do stuff with his own mother when he was young. I kind of get that feeling. I think that Frank's father had a similar relationship to his mother as he does with Dorothy, which is probably why he gravitated towards this in the first place when he realized he was in the position to force her into doing what he wanted, including allowing him to indulge in his twisted fantasies that are born as a result of what happened to him when he was a kid. I think that the reason that Frank has forced Dorothy to wear this dress and sing this song all the time is because it reminds him of his mother in a twisted way, which is why he's crying while clutching the velvet in his hand during one of her performances. We only have 2 or 3 moments where Frank is showing this side of himself, but they add so much to his character and imply a lot of really messed up and frankly tragic elements to his backstory. On top of Frank and Dorothy's son being on opposite sides of a spectrum, I think they're sort of mirrors of each other in a sense. Frank is what happens when someone is raised in that darkness and never leaves it, while Dorothy's son experienced it as a young age, but was taken from it and returned to a brighter life. I also think he may well say the word fuck more than any character I've ever seen, which is quite the accomplishment.
You fuckers, fucker! You fucker!
I will have to address my document of fuck counts for every movie I watch to verify this. The very first scene that we have of him, that being the one where he attacks Dorothy, is meant to be that big slap in the face, the dumping of cold water on our heads as we're forced to confront our own fascinations. And just from this first sequence alone, the manic, unpredictable horror that this guy manages to bring out is unforgettably unsettling. While it's extremely dark and not played humorously at all, there is still that feeling that you'll have in a lot of Lynch's work, where there's something that could be funny when taken out of context, and it just makes it so that you don't know how the hell to feel while watching. It's a super difficult scene to sit through, but hearing Frank say baby wants to fuck is so batshit insane that it feels like you're being pulled between 30 different emotions at the same time, and none of them are pleasant. So while there is some element of tragedy to his character, let this not make it seem like Frank is someone who we should feel sorry for. If the theory I've presented holds any water, then that's sad and messed up, but it doesn't come anywhere near even beginning to justify the things that we see him do. Dennis Hopper is electric here. So there's this interesting thing that happens where we want to be as far away from Frank as possible because he's so utterly deplorable, but because Hopper is so good in the role, we just can't take our eyes off him at any point. One of my favorite moments of him is when Jeffrey first meets him in the hallway while leaving Dorothy's apartment, where the entire point of this scene is to really illustrate how completely in control Frank is and is used to being. The way that he plays with Jeffrey here, tricking him into saying a ride, like the movie is just showing us that while Jeffrey has been able to be 1 foot in and 1 foot out of this world for the time being, he's no longer in control of what his involvement in this stuff looks like.
Go where?
For a ride.
A ride. Hell, that's a good idea.
The whole section of the film is extremely uncomfortable and does a really great job of capturing that feeling of being around people that you really don't want to be, but you can't leave. It's a bit of a sidebar, but man, the people playing Frank's lackeys do such a good goddamn job. We've got Brad Dourif, who despite getting recognition is someone who I still consider to be an immensely underrated actor. The dude is absolutely brilliant, and this is no exception whatsoever. Jack Nance, who's another Lynch regular, is here, and while he's quieter than Dourif's character, he does an amazing job of just strengthening that sense of Jeffrey being in way over his head as he continuously taunts him without saying anything overtly threatening. He has a way of making innocuous sentences scary, and that's very impressive.
I'm Paul. What's your name?
Jeffrey?
These guys all add so much to their relatively short screen time, and while they're freaky in their own right, it makes Frank all the more imposing when we see how they react at the slightest hint of him being upset. Ben is another fascinating character, and he's probably the most enigmatic one in the movie. He's this very soft-spoken, dreamy character who we learn next to nothing about, but he's characterized brilliantly despite only appearing in one scene. I think the thing that I appreciate the most about him, aside from Dean Stockwell's mesmerizing performance, is that he's the only character in the whole movie that Frank looks up to. I think that Ben almost represents what Frank wishes he could be, which is why we see him parroting some of the things that Ben says, like the "now it's dark" motif.
Now it's dark.
He's also constantly gassing him up, and you kind of get this sense that he badly wants Ben to like him and think that he's on top of everything. He's like, he's the boss man, but it's just cool to have this character that brings out a different side to Frank, since he doesn't behave this way with anyone else. Ben's also where some of these stranger and less explained parts of the film come from, not only because he's an extremely odd person who we learn nothing about, but also because he's one of two characters who seem to have a sort of sixth sense, as he knows before they've even opened the door that they've arrived at his house. A co-worker of Jeffrey's displays something similar earlier on, being a blind man who knows where everything in the store is and is able to know how many fingers Jeffrey is holding up every time without fail. It's one of those things that I don't really think is necessarily trying to say anything about the movie, it's just something that Lynch likes to do to bring this sense of mystery, and I love it. Now, the scene of Frank beating up Jeffrey comes as a result of Jeffrey telling him to stop going at Dorothy in the car, and he clearly doesn't take well to being told off, and especially not to being hit. It's a pretty brutal scene, and Frank is out of his fucking mind and a whole whack of substances here, but the whole reason that I want to talk about it is because of one detail in this scene that I find makes it like tenfold more disturbing, and it's something really simple. This lady dancing on top of the car to In Dreams. I really like how this movie goes out of its way to show how people who exist in this side of things are impacted by what they're around, even if they're not actively participating in it. For whatever reason, I found it to be a really unsettling detail that while this complete maniac is violently attacking someone after trying to force himself on a woman whose husband and kid he's holding captive, there's just a woman who hangs around him dancing on the car to a nice song. It's so callous and distant, really helping to emphasize how normal this is and how little chance Jeffrey has of finding anyone around who's going to be willing to help. One of the big things that's going on during the scene is that it's essentially meant to be where Jeffrey realizes that he's flown too close to the sun and is about to have a breakdown at the thought of becoming like Frank, or at the very least, having some of that in him, which is a frightening thought. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once he realizes that that same flame is hiding inside of him, that's hard to move past. Frank kisses Jeffrey and transfers his red lipstick to him, and if we naturally look at red as a symbol of violence, we can easily take this as him trying to paint Jeffrey as the same as him, as he'll go on to say. It's following that night with Frank where Jeffrey sort of sobers up and realizes that he doesn't want to be a part of any of this anymore, and the voyeuristic side of the film begins to fade away as he tries to settle back down into a quieter life. I love how they show his attempts to return to realism and peace, with him out watering the lawn like we saw his father doing during the opening scene, spending more time with Sandy and enjoying a high school dance with her. We also get confirmation that he really is planning on leaving this behind as he relinquishes all of the information that he's gathered to Sandy's father, passing the burden to him so that he can go free. There's a great detail during this section. It comes during the dance with Sandy, where once again the music that plays has a ton of significance beyond just creating an atmosphere for the scene. The song is called Mysteries of Love, and it was written by David Lynch himself alongside Angelo Badalamenti, a collaborator of his and the man who we have to thank for some of the greatest scores ever written. And one of the greatest YouTube videos of all time, by the way.
Now reach some kind of climax, and I would go, and he said, oh, that's it.
It's performed by Julie Cruz, and the reason that it's so relevant for this section of the movie is because of how this chapter of Jeffrey's life is designed to illustrate how we can find mystery and intrigue in places that don't need to be as dark as the ones that he was drawn to. It's a very dreamy, floaty song that, as the title shows, is just about the mysteries of love. that feeling that can't be put into words and can only be felt. He's drawn to strangeness, but you can find that in beauty as well, and he's now realizing that. Here's the thing though. While Jeffrey can try and put on a face and fall back into a quieter life, a luxury that no one else involved in this whole thing has, his involvement in it ran too deep during his time there, and it would feel really off if the movie ended here with so many things left unresolved. I think this part of the movie is probably the most interesting, because it does a great job of illustrating the relationship between light and dark. Jeffrey's run-in with Frank has given him an intense paranoia that instantly leads him to believing that the car that chases after them is Frank and his Goonies, which is, of course, fair considering what recently happened, when in reality, it's just Sandy's ex going after them, wanting to fight Jeffrey for taking her. We see two things here that are very important, one being that instant paranoia, but then the other side of that coin is that since he's seen real darkness, he's not going to be shaken by something like this. He shows no sign of fear whatsoever because this is absolutely nothing compared to what he's already been through. So while he's been trying to fall back into a quiet life, sticking with Sandy, dancing peacefully and playing his role in the suburbs, the unfinished business isn't going to let him do that. And it's here where Dorothy shows up in the street, completely naked, battered and dazed, having been drugged following a clear escalation in her situation. I think it's important to make it extremely clear that when we're seeing Dorothy like this, the movie is not sexualizing her. The scene was actually inspired by something that happened to Lynch when he was a young child, where he saw a completely naked woman looking lost and afraid on the side of the road at night, and it terrified him. He cried about it nonstop and found it to be deeply disturbing, feeling so out of place and like a glimpse into some unknown darkness that he wasn't even fully aware existed at that point. It's meant to be upsetting. This is the clashing of worlds, particularly highlighted when Dorothy is brought into Sandy's home and feels like she's teleported there from a completely different universe, and Jeffrey's involvement with her comes back to bite him as Sandy realizes what's going on. I love how the scene paints Jeffrey through Sandy's eyes as just, like, absolutely disgusting. They've been doing this slowly throughout the film, where, like, after sleeping with Jeffrey, Dorothy would say, like, she has his disease in her, which is an insane thing to say, and a great way of building up that sense of nastiness that this side of things is meant to encapsulate, and it's something that she repeats here. The whole thing is just a sensory onslaught for Sandy, who's trying to process like a million things in a matter of moments, and it's here where the film leads into the climax. In one of the most David Lynch things you can imagine, he had no idea what the climax of the film was going to be, couldn't figure it out at the time, but then he had a dream with things like a yellow jacket and a couple other details, so he extrapolated on that dream and built the ending of the film around it. It's a really fun scene where Sandy's father has set up a raid on Frank's house while Frank goes to Dorothy's apartment to clean up some things and kill Jeffrey, who outsmarts him using a radio that Frank also has access to and ultimately kills him. It's honestly one of the most cathartic bad guy dies moments I've seen because of how well the movie has set up Frank as just the grossest possible person. The relief that flows through the movie as that gunshot rings and Frank's head is blown open is beautiful. While the conclusion in many ways is a happy one, it's not all well and good. Dorothy's husband was killed, perhaps as a result of Dorothy fighting back against Frank after the confrontation with Jeffrey emboldened her or something like that, but in terms of how badly it could have gone, we're left on a rather beautiful note. As we enter the final scene of the film after Frank has been killed, we fade from a bright white light and zoom out of the ear, which is an oddly warm feeling moment after we've been through everything that we have. That motif is one that's only been associated with the darkness, and it feels incredibly satisfying to finally be climbing out of that and back into the sunlight. It's a lovely scene with Jeffrey wearing that shirt that it symbolizes everything the movie's been exploring, the robin coming and hearkening back to Sandy's dream, Jeffrey's father having healed, bright flowers and white fences, and with perhaps the most heartwarming detail, we see Dorothy playing with her son, wearing the hat that only a short while ago served as a reminder of his absence and the danger that he was in. Bobby Vinton's Blue Velvet returns once more, and the lyrics feel particularly impactful here. And I still can see blue velvet through my tears. They've climbed out of the shadow, they've escaped from that horrid place, but no matter what, it is always going to be a part of them that they'll remember in quiet moments. But the robins have come. This movie's a masterpiece, feeling strangely out of time with its stylistic blending of cars from the 50s, clothes and hairstyles from the 80s, microphones from the 20s, and a story that is equally timeless in its thematic core. It's a fascinating journey, indulging in our darkest curiosities and wonders that forces us to confront the difference between reality and fantasy. It acts as a sort of satiation of these curiosities while also reminding us that we don't want to take part in any of this, and is brought to dreamy, vivid life with David Lynch's singular vision. This was my introduction to Lynch's work, and I do think it's a really great place to start because it's weird, but it's not hard to follow, and some of his other movies are going to take a lot more brain power to, really piece together. Well, I don't think I could ever actually do this movie justice. I've really enjoyed just getting to gush about it because I can't get over Blue Velvet. I'm absolutely obsessed with this movie. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.